Maharaji.
Om Sadashiva-Samarambham Shankaracharyamanyamam Asmadacharya-Paryantam Vande Guru-Paramparam. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Mahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
We are on the 24th Karika of the 4th chapter. So we will chant it. Please unmute yourself. Prajnaptehe sannimitatvam अन्यथा द्वयनाशतः संक्लेशस्योपलब्धेश्च
Sankleshasyopadhyeshcha
परतन्त्रास्थिता मता
Paratantrasthitamata.
So I'll just unmute you all. So as you saw, we have been talking about the various other darshanas. And in the previous Karikas, Gaudapada has negated the view of Sankhya and Dvaita philosophers. So both Sankhya and Dvaita are theistic darshanas, astikas. And now Gaudapadacharya moves over to Nastika darshans, the atheistic darshans. What are Nastikas? Nastikas don't accept Shastram as Pramanam. And they believe only in two Pramanams, Pratyaksha, perception, Anumanam, inference. And how many Nastikas are there? There is Charvaka Matam, the completely materialistic philosophy. Then there is Jaina Matam, that is the Jainism, actually been propounded or founded by Rishabdeva, but revived later by several acharyas, the main one being Vardhamana Mahavira. And these acharyas are called jinas. Jinas meaning the person who has conquered his sense organs, sense indriyas. So that's two, which is Charvaka and Jaina. And then there is Buddhism. Now, Buddhism has four different subsections under it, four different, you might call it sub-darshanams, because they are completely different views. And these four are also Nastikas. So 4 plus 2, there are 6. There are 6 Nastika philosophies. Now here we are talking about Buddhism. In these Karikas, Gaudapada talks about Buddhism. And since it's new over here for us, let us briefly get an overview. So Nastika Darshanams in general don't accept Veda as a Pramana. And they are more oriented towards logic. So Nastika Darshanam is Tarkika, logically oriented, not oriented towards any scripture. And therefore Buddhism also has this Tarkika Darshanam tag to it. It is also based on logic. Now, though we call it Buddhism, we should be very clear that the original teachings in Buddha's own words, they are not available at all because they were never recorded. And what we now call Buddhism, we owe to King Ashoka. King Ashoka is said to have called the Buddhist scholars to his palace and asked them to put into words what they had learned, to reconstruct the teachings. So what Buddhism we know is not the original words of Buddha, but the teachings as constructed by or reconstructed by these Buddhism scholars. And based on these different versions, different ideas, there are two major divisions of Buddhism. One is called Hinayana Buddhism, and one is called Mahayana Buddhism. You may have heard these names. So Yanam basically means, it comes from the word ya, the dhatu, the basic form of ya. Ya means to go. Yati, gachati, to go. And for Yanam is something which enables you to go. So Yanam is a vehicle. And therefore these two major subdivisions are called Hinayanam, the inferior vehicle. Hinam means inferior. And Mahayanam, Maha meaning superior. So Maha is the superior vehicle. And where do they take you? They take you to moksha or liberation or kaivalya, whatever names you use. Now, Hinayanam itself has two subdivisions which are called Sautrantika Darshana. So it is Hinayanam, therefore Hinayana Sautrantika Darshanam. And there is also another thing called Vaibhashika Darshana. So Hinayana has got two divisions, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. Similarly, Mahayana has got two divisions, Yogacharya Darshanam and Madhyamika Darshanam. And therefore, these are the four schools of Buddhism, Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Yogacharya, and Madhyamika. So let us look at the views of these schools very briefly. And again, to just remind ourselves, Sautrantika and Vaibhasika are Hinayana Matam. So what does the Sautrantika philosopher say? He says that the external world, which is different from the observer subject, that really exists. Right? So that is the basic idea of the Sautrantika philosopher, that there is an outside world different from the observer. What about Vaibhasika? Vaibhasika also says the same thing. There is a outside world, an external world, which is different from the observer. Both Sautrantika and Vaibhasika say that this external world is real. The observer is real, the external world is also real. What is the difference between the two? Because both seem to be saying the same thing. The difference is that the Sautrantika philosopher says the existence of the external world is proved by perception, pratyaksha praman. But the Vaibhashika philosopher says, while he agrees that yes, there is an external world different from the observer, he says this external world cannot be proved by pratyaksham, perception. It has to be proved by anumanam, inference. So, to sum up, in Hinayana, both Sautrantika and Vaibhasika, they accept the origination of the external world. Right? This is important because we talk about Ajativadaha. We say the world didn't exist at all. Doesn't exist at all. So both the Sautrantika and Vaibhasika, they say that external world exists. So they are Jativadaha. They accept the origination of the world. Only Sautrantika says, I can say there is external world because it is proved by perception. And Vaibhasika says, though there is an external world, its existence cannot be proved through perception. It has to be proved through inference. And what is the inference? He says, I, the observer, experience so many objects and so many things. And from this multiple experiences, I infer that there is a plurality of objects. Right? Multiple objects are there. And of course, this Vaibhasika philosopher also says there is internal objects and external objects. And he says There's a difference between the external plurality and the internal experience. The external objects, the plurality, is inferred therefore. How? Because when I see a glass, I experience the glass. That experience is internal to me. And from that internal experience, I infer that there is an external glass. So that is the reasoning of the Vaibhasika, that all experiences are internal, but every experience, I am not able to actually perceive the glass. My perception of the glass is dependent upon my experience of the glass. Therefore, that perception cannot be taken as pratyaksha. It has to be taken as anumana, inference only. But both accept that there is a observed external world which is different from the observer. So much for Hinayana. We are going very, very briefly, just enough to understand the Karikas. Okay. So this is not the entire discussion on Buddhism. Then the second portion we said was Mahayana Mata. Mahayana consisting of Yogachara and Madhyamika. Madhyamika is also called Shunyavada. So Yogachara philosopher, what does he say? He is saying he differs from the Hinayana. So he says that there is no independent, real external world which is separate from the observer. The observer is who? The consciousness principle. So, for example, he says that just as there is no real dream world which is separate from the dreamer, the individual, so this external world which you see is only an appearance. There is no real external world. It's very close to Vedanta. What about now this is the view of the Yogachara philosopher. What about the view of the Madhyamika philosopher? So in all the other three, remember, there is a world, there is an observer. In the first two, the Hinayana, there is a real world, there is a real observer. In Yogachara, there is a real observer, but there is a apparent world only. Real world doesn't exist. So these are the first three. All three accept that there is a observer. Two accept there is a real world. One says there is a false world and an apparent world, a dream world. What about the fourth one, the Madhyamika philosopher? He says that there is neither an external world nor the observer. For the Madhyamika philosopher, there is no world and there is no observer. There is nothing at all. Everything is shunyam. Therefore, it is called Shunyavada. As you may have noticed, the third one, the Yogachara Matam, who say that there is no external world separate from the observer. They admit the existence of an external world, but it doesn't exist independently. Which means what? In our language, Yogachara says there is a dependent world. Dependent world is what? What?
Maya.
Name.
Mithya.
Mithya. Right? So this Yogachara Matam is very close to Vedanta. It says it is Mithya also. Advaita also says there is no external world. The world is dependent upon us. And we say there is subject alone which is real, and the external world is a dependent world. Yogachara also says the same thing. Then the Yogachara says that the subject is the observer, consciousness principle. The Advaitin also says subject observer is consciousness principle. Thus, there is a whole lot of similarity between Vedanta and Buddhism, the specific school of Buddhism called Yogachara. There is, however, one very big major difference. Yogachara says that consciousness is shanikam, a temporary one. It comes and goes. It comes and goes. And for Yogachara, therefore, the subject observer is not a single consciousness principle, but is a series of consciousness principles coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. That is why it's called Shanika Vada. Shanikam means momentary. So for the Yogacara Darshanam, the subject is a series of coming and going, fleeting consciousness principles. One momentary consciousness comes and goes, is replaced by another, then replaced by a third, and replaced by a fourth. So there is a continuous flow of momentary consciousness. That is what they call the observer. While we, Advaitins, say there is only one eternal, continuous consciousness. For us, consciousness is not a flow, it's ever existing. But both say external world is mithya, consciousness is satyam. There is no external world separate from satyam. That is the theory of both. Now, what are we going to see? We are going to see first that the Yogacara philosophers are trying to establish their philosophy is the real one. And therefore, naturally, they have to refute Hinayana Mata, which say that there is an external world separate from the observer. Because their very basic principle is that world is mithya. They don't use the word mithya, but for our understanding, I am using the word mithya. So to that extent, they align with us. And therefore, this Yogacara Matam wants to establish a philosophy. And then for that purpose, it has to refute the first two Matams, Authentica and Vaibhasika. Right. And here, the Karikas, though written by Gaudapada, you can take them as either the fact that we agree with what Yogacara Matam is saying, insofar as they are refuting the Sautrantika and Vaibhasika views. In that respect only, we borrow the arguments and we agree with them. But later on, after that, we have to now do what? To establish our matam, we have to refute both the Yogacara matam as well as the Madhyamika matam. So that we'll see later. With this background, let us look at all the Karikas. So in this Karika 24, it is the views of the Vaibhasika. We can take it that we are also agree. So he says experiences of knowledge, pragnaptehe, knowledge. Pragnaptehe is prajnanam. Prajnanam means in this respect, in this particular context, it is experiences of shabda, sparsha, rasa, all that. All the experience which you get, that is called knowledge over here. Pragnaptehe. So he says pragnaptehe sannimittatvam. Sannimittatvam means should be accompanied by an external cause. Nimittam. Nimittam is what? A cause. Sannimittam should be accompanied by. Therefore, pragnaptehe, any experience which you have of anything in this world should have an external cause. Pragnaptehe sannimittam. And therefore, this philosopher is saying that pure consciousness without an object can give rise to no experience at all. Every experience or knowledge which you have presupposes the existence of an external object. This argument has to be understood very carefully. Do you agree that any experience has to have an external object present? If yes, why yes?
Yes.
If no, why no?
Yes.
Why yes?
Be- Something is present, then only you can see it or experience it. Apratyaksha pramana.
Okay, fine. So we'll accept that. If there is no external object, there can be no experience of the external object. Right? And one example we can give is that in Sushupti Avastha, there is no external world for you, and therefore you don't have any experience at all. So, to the extent, we agree with them. In fact, even an internal knowledge, we're talking about external experience, but even an internal knowledge is only possible because there is a corresponding external object. Right? This is going to the other end. If you are saying that I know of the existence of something else, though it's not in front of me, you're still saying that there is an external object. So even internal knowledge is possible, and the perception is possible, and the experience is possible only if there is an external object. And therefore, he says you have to accept that plurality, the fact that external objects are there. Otherwise, you cannot explain your experience at all. And therefore, anyatha dvayanashataha. Otherwise, anyatha dvayanashataha. Dvayanashataha means plurality. Dvaya is dvaitam. Dvaitam nashataha. Plurality, duality is destroyed. And therefore, without that duality, how can you explain the experiences? You have to have duality, which means you have to have objects outside you if you have to have any experience at all. And then he says, Sankleshasya upalabdhescha. Experience of pain is present, for example. And then what happens? Paratantra asti. Paratantra asti iti mataha. Therefore, paratantra, the existence of some other object, which is the cause of that pain, is proved. For example, if my hand gets hurt, I'm feeling the pain, right? Or my hand touches fire, I feel the heat and the burn. So that is sankleshasya, experience of the burning pain. What is it due to? Paratantra asti. The external cause, the fire must exist. So that is the idea being presented, that any experience has to have an object outside. And similarly, if there is an emotion being experienced by you, there must be a external object. So paratantra here means the existence of other objects, iti mataha. Paratantram is basically the other systems of philosophy. All systems of philosophy accept this fact he is saying. What fact? That if there is an object outside you, then only the experience can take place. Which is saying that all other systems of philosophy, they accept Dvaitam. They accept a real external world. If you are saying that any experience I have must have something outside me, then you're accepting something outside you, which means you're accepting a real external world. Right? And this is the perception part of it. What about the inference part of it? If I experience pain, that pain is the hetu, from which is the cause, from which I can make an anumanam, inference, that there is something which caused that pain. So there is a perception, the external object caused me pain. When the external object is not there, then there is an inference that that external object is there because it is causing me pain. Therefore, this is the view of the Vaisheshika, that external world is proved by inference only. And Sautantrika says external world is proved by perception. This is the essence of this particular Karika. Now we look at the next Karika. Karika number 25. Prajnaptehe sannimitatvam
सन्निमितत्वम्
ishyate yukti darshanat
Ishyate yukti darshana
nimittasya nimittatvam
nimittasya nimittatvam
ishyate bhuta darshanat.
ishyate bhuta darshana.
So he says, Yukti Darshana, logically, Pragnaptehe Sannimitatvam, the fact that all experiences or all knowledge has an external cause is correct. But Bhuta Darshana, from the standpoint of reality also, Nimittasya Ishyate, the external cause has to be accepted Animittatvam as no cause. So very confusing idea. It is logical to say that knowledge or experience will have an external cause. This is the correct view, he says. But from the standpoint of reality, you have to say that external cause should be understood as absence of any cause. What does it mean? So, Shankara explains. With regard to the conclusions of the Hinayana Darshana, which is Sautantrika and Vaibhasika, right? The following view is presented by the Shanika Vijnanavadi. Shanika Vijnanavadi is the Yogachara philosopher. So this is a Yogachara philosopher refuting the views of Sautantrika and Vaibhasika. So in these two Karikas, 25 and 27, this Hinayana Matam is refuted. So what they are saying? He's saying that what Vaibhasika says may look to be seemingly correct from the logical point of view because every experience or every knowledge should have a corresponding object. To use Sanskrit words, every pratyaya, every thought should have a pratyaya vishaya, should have an object corresponding to that thought. Then what does Yogacara say? It should be easy to understand because this is very much in line with what Vedanta talks about. Then he says, logically speaking, it seems to be okay to say that every experience must have an external corresponding object. But when you inquire into the external corresponding object, you will find what you talk about, let us say, bangle experience, or you talk about chain experience, or you talk about ring experience. There are multiple words, plurality of words. And corresponding to each word, there is a thought, bangle thought, chain thought, ring thought. Thus, you have the objects, the knowledge, and the words. But Yogacara says, inquire into the objects. When you look into the objects, into the chain and the bangle, you will find that really speaking, there is no substance called bangle. There is no substance called ring. There is no substance called chain. The only substance is gold. And therefore, bangle, ring, and chain are merely words. These words have generated a thought. But for these thoughts, for these words, there is no corresponding object at all. Because there is no object called bangle. There is only gold. There is no object called ring. There is only gold. There is no object called chain. There is only gold. Okay, so the argument goes that since the objects are not there, what have we understood? That we are holding on to words for which there are no objects. And therefore, this Yogachara Mat fellow says, what is the purpose of these different words when there are no corresponding objects? So in Sanskrit, once the padartha, pada ka artha, the object, is negated, what is the point of holding on to the padam, the word? Because words have no relevance if the corresponding object is not there. Therefore, on inquiry, says this philosopher, you will find that padartha is not really there, and therefore you will find that padam is also not really there. But we continue to use these words and we continue to transact. Up to here, Advaitin is in agreement with Yogachara because we also say that Padam and Padartha both are mithya. We say the objects are mithya. Therefore, the words used to represent the objects are also mithya. Okay. So far, you follow the argument? Any doubts about the argument so far?
No.
Yes. I will assume that you all understood. So once the padartha, the object has been negated, the word padam has been negated, what remains? Only the adhishthanam, the substratum remains. What is the adhishthanam of both pada and padartha? It is the
Brahman.
observer, the consciousness principle. And therefore, here he is saying that you can never prove the existence of an object separate from the consciousness principle. Because those two are mithya, dependent upon the consciousness principle, the observer. So now look at the verse. Yukti darshanat prajnaptehe sannimitatvam ishyate. From the point of logic, superficial logic, you can accept that every knowledge or every experience has got a corresponding padam, a corresponding padartha, an object, right? Bhuta darshanat, in reality, bhutam means swarupam, reality. Bhuta darshanat, in reality, when you inquire into the substance, into the object, you will find that there is really no substance at all. They will become non-substantial because they resolve into the substratum. So Jagat, the universe, is a mere word. There is no such thing called Jagat which you can separate from the observer consciousness, which is I. Another easier example to understand is dream experience. For every dream object that you see, the dreamer sees an external object in his dream. But when waking up, he knows there was no external object. Right? During dream, if you see an elephant, if you are in a room or you are in a zoo in the dream, you are seeing the elephant which is outside you. You, the dreamer, are there, and the elephant which is outside you is also there. You see very carefully. The elephant is outside the dreamer, but not outside the waker. The understanding has to be very clear. It is the waker who projects the dream and the dreamer. Therefore, the entire world experienced by the dreamer is outside the dreamer, definitely, but not outside the waker. How do you know? Because when you wake up, for the waker, the entire world has disappeared. Any questions? Right. We look at the next Karika, Karika number 26. Chittam na samsparsyatyartham
चित्तं न संस्पर्श्य
संस्पर्शम्
नार्थाभासं तथैव च
नार्थाभासं
नार्थाभासं
तथैव च
तथैव च
अभूतो यतश्चार्थ
अभूतो हि
अभूतो हि
यतश्चार्थो
यतश्चार्थः
नार्थाभासस्ततः पृथक्.
नार्थाभासस्ततः
नार्थाभासस्ततः
पृथक्.
पृथक्.
So again the Yogacara Darshana philosopher is continuing. He says there is no external world at all. Consciousness alone is there. And this consciousness, it doesn't have any experience because there is no external object. And therefore the consciousness does not come into contact with any external object at all. Right? Why? Because there are no objects. And therefore he says Chittam Artham na samsprashati. The consciousness does not come into contact with any artham, any real object at all, because there is no real object at all, right? It is like the waker. He never comes into contact with the dream elephant, because the dream elephant is not there for him. It is there only for the dreamer. Okay. Then can you say that the waker comes in contact with the mithya elephant? Because the real elephant is not there. So therefore he says, na artha abhasam samsprasati. Consciousness does not come into contact with a mithya object also. Artha abhasa. What is apparently an object? Mithya object. Why? Because the unreal object, the mithya object, does not exist separate from the consciousness principle, from the subject observer. And if there is no object separate from the subject, how can the subject come into contact with such an object? You can take the example of gold. Does gold come into contact with the real bangle? No. Why? Because the real bangle doesn't exist. Only gold exists. Does gold come into contact with the unreal mithya bangle? No. Because there is no mithya bangle separate from the gold. And therefore, gold cannot come into contact with the real bangle. Gold cannot come into contact with the mithya bangle. Therefore, gold can never contact the bangle. What is the reason? If gold has to touch the bangle, if two things have to touch each other, there must be two things, gold and bangle. Gold cannot touch the bangle because gold is a substance, while bangle is not a substance. Bangle is only the name for the same substance of gold. So when there is only one substance, where is the question of the substance contacting the other? And therefore, Yogacara is saying that matter and consciousness, the world and consciousness are two names, but substance is one. Remember, this is the same view that we have. Jagat is mithya, Atma is satyam. Brahma satyam, Jagat mithya. Right? There is no Jagat separate from Brahman. So, Jagat and Brahman are two names, but the substance is only Brahman. Right? From a wise person's point of view, consciousness is the substance. That same consciousness manifests before you. The Ajnani calls that same Brahman. The same Brahman is called Jagat by the Ajnani. Therefore, the Artha is not there. The Artha Abhasa is not there. There is no real object. There is no Mithya object. And consciousness does not contact either of them. A real object is non-existent. An apparent object does not exist separate from consciousness. Therefore, there is no way that consciousness can contact the Jagat. There is no independent mithya separate from Satyam consciousness. And therefore, since the external world of Anatma does not exist at all, where is the question of Chittam, consciousness, coming into contact with any real Anatma or Mithya Anatma? None of them, neither of them are separate from consciousness because there is only one substance, consciousness. For any contact, you need at least two substances. I would like to know how far you guys are understanding because it's all very, deep. So if there's any doubt, please let me know. It's a heavy subject, so we'll just do one more verse for today, and I'll leave you all to, what do you call, think over it. So we'll go to the 27th mantra, we'll chant. Nimittam na sada chittam
निमित्तं न सदा चित्तं
samsparshyat vadvasutrishu
संस्पृशत्यध्वसुत्रिषु
samsparshyat yadvasutrishu
संस्पृशत्यध्वसुत्रिषु
Animitto viparyasaha.
अनिमित्तो विपर्यासः
Katham tasya bhavishyati.
कथं
कथं
तस्य
तस्य
भविष्यति
भविष्यति.
And this is the conclusion. In the first line of this Karika, it is a conclusion by the Yogacharya. Chittam sada na nimittam samsprashyati. The consciousness never comes into contact with any object at all. And sada is explained by saying trishu advasu. You will break it up carefully. Sada trishu advasu. Advasu means kalaha, time period. Therefore, trishu advasu means three periods of time, past, present, future. So this is the first conclusion, that in all the three periods of time, consciousness cannot come into any object at all. And the second line is an answer to a question which is not here. So we have to imagine the question. So the question is by a Hinayana philosopher. He says, okay, so you are saying that you don't accept an external world at all. If you don't accept an external world at all, how will you say what is right and what is wrong? You cannot differentiate between right and wrong if there is no external world. The second line is the answer to that question. Unspoken question or unwritten question. Question is there, we have to imagine the question. So he says, Annimitaha. Animitaha. Without an external object. Nimittaha here means the cause, the external object. Animittaha, without an external object, katham tasya viparyasaha bhavishyati. How can that consciousness be said to have fallen into error? Be said to have made an erroneous perception. What is the error? Now, for example, you take the Raju Sarpa, the rope snake. So when two people look at the rope snake, one person has got better eyes, so he's got rope cognition, and one person has got weaker eyes and strong imagination, so he got snake cognition. What do we say? We say rope knowledge is correct knowledge, snake knowledge is erroneous knowledge. And what the Hinayana philosopher is asking is, if you don't admit an external world, on what basis will you say that knowledge is right or wrong? Because here I'm admitting the external rope, and therefore I say rope knowledge is correct and snake knowledge is wrong. What is the answer? When we say something is right or wrong, we say it on the basis of the alignment of our perception with the nature of the external object. So when you say that is snake, your perception of snake is not aligned with the nature of the rope, with the fact that that object is actually a rope. Therefore, it is a wrong perception. But when you say that object is a rope, then your knowledge is aligned with the nature of the rope. Therefore, you call it right knowledge. Right? So, right and wrong division, he is saying, is possible only when you are able to align your knowledge with the external object. And if you are saying external object is not there at all, where is the very basis for saying something is right or wrong? Right? And if anybody remembers Yoga Sutra, no? Viparyayo mithya jnanam atadrupa pratishtham. Incorrect knowledge is that knowledge which doesn't correspond to the reality. Atadrupam pratishtham. What the knowledge which we have, if it doesn't correspond to the reality of the object, then it is called wrong knowledge. Okay, then he says, you explain the term error to me. What does Yogacara say? Yogacara says, I am saying there is no external world at all. And you are continuing to say that external world is there, therefore you have to say wrong and right. Yogacara says, I am not saying there is any external world at all. I am saying there is no external world. Where then is the question of any concept of right or wrong? I don't have to align my knowledge with the external object because I don't admit an external object at all. And therefore, that's the line, second line here. Katham tasya chittasya viparaya, not chittasya, katham tasya viparyasaha bhavishyati. So, viparyasaha should be taken as chittasya viparyasaha, the incorrect error in your brain, in your intellect. Katham tasya viparyasaha bhavishyati. How can you talk about right and wrong things or right and wrong notions? Because animittaha, there is no object at all outside. And when there is no object at all outside, where is the question of my making an error or my explaining to you what is an error? We have to explain error only if there is an external object. But since there are no external objects, there is no question of error. And if there is no question of error, why should I spend my time explaining to you what is an error? The idea that there is a wrong perception, he's saying, your idea that there can be wrong perception, that idea itself is a wrong perception. Like in a dream, no perception of the dreamer, no dream object of the dreamer is right or wrong, because there is no external world at all. And Shankara says, gives an answer. How do you explain this? Shankara says, because of Maya. The perception you think, you say the perception is wrong. Why? Because there is Maya. Even though external world is absent, and it is the very consciousness principle appearing as that external world, because of Maya, there seems to be an experience of something which is not there, something external which is not there. This is the text of the essence of this Karika, and we can, in one line, we can summarize it. Experience of any object does not prove reality of the object. With this, the Yogacara Matam has been refuted, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika also. It is the Yogacara Matam's refutation of the Hinayana, Sautrantika and Vaibhashika Matams. Now we have to talk about the refutation of the Yogacara itself. That we will see in the next class. Any questions? I will urge you to go carefully over this, because we have refuted the Buddhism Matams, first two Matams. We have now to refute the Mahayana schools. Hinayana has been refuted.
So, Umacharya,
Yeah.
in short, we can say that the knowledge of any object depends upon the presence of knowledge from the Vyavharik point of view only. But when we see it from the reality point of view, there is
Nothing separate from
difference. There is no difference between the cause. Between the
observer and
observed. So there is no.
There is no reason at all. Yeah.
There is no reason.
Yeah. So essentially, what has been done is Yogacara has said that we don't accept your view that there is a external world. So in that real external world, remember, whenever it's external world, we are saying real external world, because that is the view of the Hinayana. Both the Hinayana schools, they talk about real external world. Yogacara also talks about external world, but he says it is mithya. Okay, thank you for your patience. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Meva Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat, Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience. Om.
Thank you, Acharya. Thank you.